Welcome to Contemporary First Nation Voices. This is NBE 3C, grade 11 English, college level, and this is Jillian Percy. Today is class 25, and we are going to work on assignment 38 today. Here are all the ways you can contact us. In the studio right now, you can call 1-800-465-7144. If you want to talk to me when I'm off the air, you can call the office 1-800-667-3703, extension 2211. Please be aware that it does close up around 4:30. My email is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. I should specify Jillian is spelled with a G there. My Facebook is G capital P ERCY capital W AHSA, so G Percy Wassa. If you're looking for it, it's got this little fall scene and then me in a little black dress for the avatar. If you are reaching out to me on Facebook, make a friend request, but also include a message telling me who you are and what course you're in. And then there are two different YouTube channels that you can look at to see previously recorded classes. There's my channel, which is also called G Percy Wassa, and it has a playlist of just the NBE 3C classes. And then there is the Wassa Distance Education Center channel, which is everybody at the school, only from this year. This course has been taught in previous years, but it was by a different teacher, and the course has changed somewhat. So please make sure you're looking at the ones that I have taught, not the previous gentleman, okay? All right, how to hand in work. There are many different ways that you can hand in assignments, kind of choose what works best for you. The easiest way is probably give it to the DEC at your learning center and ask them to scan it and send it to me. When you do that, always make sure you hang on to your originals because you want to make sure you've got a copy. Things can and do go missing. It's just kind of a fact of life. You can fax it to me, 1-800-463-7852. That's if you're in Ontario. If you are anywhere else in Canada, 1-877-990-2023. You can also scan it yourself using a scanner app on your phone and then send it to me. I'll explain a little bit more how to do that in a minute. You can mail it to me, but I'm going to say that would not be the best choice. When you do this, you have to hang on to the originals. Keep in mind it can take a couple weeks to get to me, and so people can get kind of frustrated by the turnaround time. If you use Google Docs to do your assignments, you can share those assignments with me. When you do that, make sure you've authorized me to view them or edit them. Sometimes people forget that step and then I can't really see anything. You can also take photographs. This is not my preferred way because it's really, really slow. The scanner app works a little bit better for this, but if you do choose to do it this way, make sure the photo is really clear and not blurry. Preferably you've either written in pen or typed so it's dark enough for me to read. Pencil does not necessarily show up very well in photographs. When you take the photo, make sure your phone is right over top of the assignment, not kind of off at an angle, or the writing will get quite odd and distorted the farther away from the phone it is. When you share it with me, don't just click the share button. That works really great if you've got a phone, but I'm on a computer, so it will come up in a very strange size. Don't put it in the body of the email. Instead, save it as a file and then attach it to your email that you write to me. Whenever you hand in work, please send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. You can include me in the email if you want to be safe. When you do this, the secretary can log that you submitted the work and it goes into our database so that anyone can see, yep, it's right there. Please include your full name, the course name, the assignment name, and the number right physically on the actual assignment. Like I was saying the other day, sometimes I get a whole pile of assignments from different students. It's very easy for something to happen in a page to get mixed up into someone else's. So you really want to make sure that yours is labeled, okay? Hang on. All right, here's a little poster done by Adobe Scanner. I use that one. It's free. Adobe's a really reliable company. I find it really easy to use, and I'm not super tech savvy, so I think it'd be fairly easy for anyone else. Obviously, first install the app on your phone, then open it up when you want to use it. Hold it over your assignment. Now they've got it at a bit of a slant. If you see that, I would move it a little bit more forward so it's not so slanted. You can play around with the borders so it's only getting the paper and not at all the table. If you've got more than one page to scan, you just keep repeating 2 and 3 over and over until you've got all your pages done. Then tap continue. Now it'll let you preview everything. You can see, is it clear? Is it blurry? If it's blurry, take that particular photo over. If the pages got mixed up, you can put them back into order. Then you save the PDF, give it a name, and save it somewhere. Google Drive, Dropbox, your phone, wherever you save things, and then write me an email and attach it that way. Okay, we are working on week 8. We are right here on Wednesday. We should be looking at assignment 38 today. We are almost at the end of unit 3. And by tomorrow, I think we should be on to unit 4, okay? As always, this is kind of a little bit of a rough estimate because it's a newer course for me. Keep in mind, some assignments have been added, changed, or eliminated. The numbers I am showing may not match your originals. You are welcome to hand in either the original version or the revised version until the end of this school year in June. However, I do suggest you call me and get the revised version if possible. It's usually a better version. If it is after September of 2025, you must call and get the revised version. One of the reasons of having to rewrite things is a lot of the web links are broken in the original version. So if you're frustrated and that's why I'm saying call me and you can get the new version, because I've had to find new movies, new articles, new links, because a lot of them just, like normal things with internet, kind of fall out of date. As always, on unit 3, is this unit 4? Yeah, we're on lesson 14 right now. We're going to be on lesson 15 by the end. Okay, so we're still talking about movies, reclaiming culture through film. One strategy that Indigenous people have used to overcome some of the damage done to their culture through the residential school system is to revive the culture through the retelling of their own stories, as well as their way of life. This has not only led to many books, as we've seen, but also to various films, including animations, feature-length movies, documentaries, short films. One Inuit filmmaker explains his reasons for the making of one film in an interview. In the 1980s, an Inuit elder told filmmaker Zacharias Canuck a story about a young woman who was learning shamanism from her grandmother. 3 years ago, the acclaimed Nunavut filmmaker began turning the story into a short animated film, which will make its North American debut at the Toronto International Film Festival in September. Zacharias Canuck says his latest film project aims to reclaim Inuit pre-Christian spirituality. This is a photo of him. I believe he's in his 60s at this point. Canuck says that Ankuska Jijuk, the shaman's apprentice, was a result of needing to tell the story as it was stuck in my head and wanting to begin the conversation on reclaiming Inuit spirituality while experimenting with a different form of storytelling, animation. In the last 100 years, Christianity bulldozed Inuit culture and shamanism, and part of this assimilation process was to ban storytelling and ayaya singing, he said. That wasn't what my sermon was at the church when I was growing up. The ayaya singing that he mentions is a special kind of singing in Inuit culture that is used to tell personal stories. It also used drums made of driftwood or caribou hides. Throat singing is another type of Inuit singing that is used as a vocal game, usually between two women. It uses a panting style of sounds made through inhaling and exhaling. Throat singing often tries to imitate non-human sounds like walruses or seagulls or the wind blowing. Some of this style of singing will be heard on the soundtrack of the film that we're going to look at today. This is an image of throat singers, and you can see normally they face each other. They may hold hands. They're kind of working together. It's sort of an interesting thing where they're cooperating but also competing with each other. And then this is a version of ayaya singing. It's a little different. It's more storytelling focused. Okay, so this is about key question 38. For this assignment, you're going to watch a short Indigenous film and then answer questions about it afterwards. The film is called Angakasura Jajuk, The Shaman's Apprentice. So I was having a hard time finding things. There's a lot of things behind paywalls. This one is on GEM CBC. You have to sign up for a free account, but it is free. They give you like a 7 free day trial, and they don't ask you for any kind of payment information. So just when that trial ends, they'll block you at that point. So there's the link to that. That's the name of the show. Just in case you get kind of confused, there is another show called Shaman's Apprentice. I don't think it's on GEMS CBC, but it's from another country and it has a completely different look to it. So I'm going to show you the picture in a second. So make sure you're on the correct one. When you're answering this, be sure to answer in complete sentences, and I will be marking it using the answering questions rubric that we've used before. Okay, so you can see it here. This is kind of the classic picture they show with it all the time. They called it animation. It isn't technically animation. Well, it's what they call stop motion animation. They're actually like little tiny itty bitty puppets that they move carefully piece by piece. Has a very different feel to it, okay? Make sure this is the one you're watching. You can see it's CBC Gem, sorry. So if you there's a little button there, it'll say create an account. If you click it, it will tell you to give your email, then you set up a password. And like I said, they never asked me for any kind of payment information when I did this. So you'll have to watch the show. I wish I could watch it with you, but like I said, YouTube's just not letting us do that. It's not very long. My memory is it's about 10 or 15 minutes. So first of all, number one, what strange event happens to the shaman's piss pot? And why do you think the filmmaker included this event? That's not my word for it. That's the film's word for it, just so you know. Number two, what does the shaman ask the sick man when she meets him? And how is this question different from the question a typical non-Indigenous doctor might ask? Now, I want to talk about this. There are questions that are answered with information that is directly stated in the text, and there are questions that you'll need to answer that have what's called indirectly stated information. I believe we've talked about this before, but I want to do a quick review because of this kind of movie. I'm asking both types of question. So a question that can be answered with directly stated information, including film, it's not just books. Usually these are questions that are asking for a very specific detail, like where was the family going to? What time did they leave? Who did they meet? These kind of questions basically only have one right answer, okay? But other types of questions need you to draw your own conclusions or make some inferences, okay? Inferences are where you're sort of reading between the line and trying to understand what's going on, even if the author doesn't state it directly. The example I've used a lot of times before is if you were sitting there at home and somebody stomped into your house and they slammed the door and they threw their shoes down and they stomped up the stairs and they were muttering and swearing, they are probably mad. They don't have to say, I am mad for you to know it. You're kind of reading between the lines. And we do that kind of thinking all the time in real life. But sometimes people forget to do it when they are reading or looking at movies. So this is just kind of my sort of reminder that this kind of thinking is something we also do while we're watching movies. In many cases, an author is trying to expect you to make connections between what they're showing you and what you already know about in your own life, in other books or movies you've watched, or just your understanding of the world in order to understand what is happening, right? They don't want the characters to have to constantly say, I am mad, I am sad, or whatever's going on, right? When you have, when I'm asking you these kind of questions, a lot of times I'm asking you things like why or what do you think? Things like why is Agatha's mom angry with her? What do you think is going to happen when she sees the bully? Now, a lot of times these may have a right answer, but there may be a few possible answers. Like, why is Agatha's mom agreeing with her? Maybe there's only one reason, but maybe there's a few reasons that are possible. What do you think is going to happen? Anything reasonable would be acceptable there, right? Based on what you understand about bullies and what you understand about the actual characters. So these kind of questions, sometimes students will find these frustrating because they'll be like flipping through the book and they're wanting an answer that's already right there. But these aren't those kind of questions. These are the kind of questions where you're going to have to kind of think and sort of create your own answer based on what you understand about life. And then for some questions, you're just stating an opinion, right? For these ones, there's usually no right answer, just your own ideas. Now, sometimes the question is phrased in a way that makes it very obvious, but other times the teacher may not realize they're being a bit vague, and you may not realize that's what they're looking for. So let me show you what I mean. In an obvious format, I might say something like, in your opinion, what do you think her father should do? There, I've made it really clear. But sometimes a teacher might say something like, what do you think her father should do? And again, some students will get really frustrated and be like, well, how would I know? I'm not in the book, blah, blah, blah. They get really upset. It's just asking for your opinion. There is no right answer, okay? The only clue that you might have is the idea of what do you think? And in this way, they're kind of using the word think as a synonym for what's your opinion? What's your idea, okay? Generally, again, with this kind of question, there's not one right answer. They're looking for you to express your opinion and support it with some details. It should kind of make sense and be a reasonable answer. Like if the character has always been a very patient person and is always very gentle and never yells, it'd be an oddball thing to say at this point, maybe they are suddenly screaming unless you've got a good reason for it. And, if it's a story based that's very realistic and suddenly you decide aliens show up, well, why? That doesn't make a lot of sense based on what you already know. So it should be a reasonable opinion, right? You wouldn't want to just kind of be off the wall, but there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, okay? So the two questions we had before, both question 1 and 2, they're both starting with a question that looks for directly stated information. It's right there. But then they also ask kind of a follow-up question that needs you to use indirectly stated information or your own opinion. Let me kind of just go back for a second to show you what I mean. What strange event happens to the shaman's piss pot? That is directly not stated, but you'll view it. If you look at it, you will see it happen. But then it asks you for your opinion. Why do you think the filmmaker included this event? Now, we don't know for sure. I don't have the filmmaker here to ask him, and you don't either. So we just have to kind of make some speculation about that. Same thing for number 2. What does the shaman ask the sick man when she meets him? That's a specific detail. If you watch the movie, you will see it. But then the next question is asking you to think about things and give an opinion. How is this question different from the question a typical non-Indigenous doctor might ask? So you have to kind of think about, when I've gone to the doctor, what are the typical questions they ask me? How is that different than what the shaman is asking? So these kind of questions have one sort of factual one and then a follow-up question that's more opinion-based. So I just wanted you to be aware of that when you're looking, okay? Oh, sorry. When I move things over, sometimes they decide to renumber things for some reason. I don't know why the program does that. Number 3, where do the shaman and her apprentice decide to go when the medicine doesn't work? Number 4, what warning does the shaman give her apprentice before they enter this new place? And then what response does the apprentice give her? Now, these are detail-oriented questions. When you watch the movie, you will just see it, okay? Number 5, what visual or sound elements does the filmmaker use to try to convey the unusual nature of this new place? Okay, so I want to point out this one is kind of a follow-up question to number 4. Question 4 asked where they went to. Question 5 is still kind of talking about the exact same place where they went to, but it's focusing on what were the visual cues or sound cues that the filmmaker uses when they're in that place to try to help you get an understanding of what that place is like. I know that's a little bit vague. It will make more sense when you actually watch the movie, though, okay? All right, number 6. What does the shaman say will be the consequence of fear? So that's a directly stated. You will find that in the movie. In your opinion, why might the Inuit culture want to discourage youth from showing fear? So this is a traditional story, right? Well, a story about, I guess, a traditional activity, right? So think about why the filmmaker included this kind of commentary about fear. What does that say about Inuit culture? Number 7, The filmmaker makes use of a dream or a sort of vision to convey why the man became sick, but the reason isn't directly stated. Like if you watch it, it's not 100% obvious. In your opinion, why do you think? What is the reason that the man became sick? And explain your reasons for thinking this with details from the film. So when I look at the film, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 possible reasons based on what we see, because there's more than one way to interpret those actions, okay? For both of these questions, you may need to apply your understanding of Inuit culture. If you don't know a whole lot about it, we've talked a little bit about it, but not a whole lot, you may want to look up a quick article on the Inuit if you don't know much about them. But it's okay to just use your opinion, right? Inuit are sort of one type of Indigenous people, so they all have a lot of similarities to First Nations and Métis, but they do live in a really harsh environment, and that does affect some of the choices their culture makes, right? Number 8. The movie ends with the shaman asking her apprentice what she has learned, but then we never hear her answer. The movie just starts rolling the credits. Why do you think the filmmaker did not allow the apprentice to give her answer? Do you feel this was an effective choice for the ending? And explain your reasons for why you believe this was or was not effective. So all of that is more or less opinion. I want to talk about the word effective for a second. When I'm saying effective, like, do you think it works? Or did you find it bothered you or upset you or didn't work in some way? So this is, like I said, there's a lot of leeway to these questions. Number 9, imagine that you are the apprentice. What answer would you give the shaman about what you learned on this trip? So imagine that you just went through this whole experience with the shaman, and what did you learn? What did you feel was the main message or important lesson, I guess, that you learned from doing this particular trip? And again, you might have a different idea than mine. There's not a right answer, but it should be a reasonable answer. It should make sense based on what her character is like. Number 10, what message do you feel the filmmaker wanted to convey to his audience with this film, right? Do you think that Indigenous and non-Indigenous viewers will both see the same message in this film? And then explain why or why not. Now, again, this is another opinion question, right? There's no necessarily right or wrong answer. What do you think the filmmaker was trying to convey? Like, what was important to him that he wanted to get across? And then, again, most of my students, I think like 99% are Indigenous people. So what did you take from this film? And then if you can think of somebody that you know that's non-Indigenous, do you think if they watched the same film that they would get the same meaning and the same message, or would they get a different message? And explain your reasons for thinking so. Again, no right or wrong answer. I just kind of want to know your opinions about this. Finally, number 11, this is going to sound a little off topic, but it's kind of related to what we're talking about. Telefilm is an organization whose driving goal is to help Canadians produce more films and other audiovisual material. Okay. They specifically focus on all Canadians, but they have a special area that just focuses on Indigenous filmmakers. Almost anytime you see a Canadian film, you're going to see something that says like, thanks to Telefilm for helping support us, because they provide money to filmmakers for different things. So take a quick look at that article that's from their site, and flip through what kind of support do they give to Indigenous filmmakers, okay? Why is this important? Why does it matter? All right, that's the end of lesson 14, and then we're moving on to lesson 15. Okay. The film review. So your goal in this lesson, you're going to investigate the elements of a film review, and then you will apply this knowledge when you create your own film review for an Indigenous movie. Introduction. One form of article or writing that you find in a newspaper or a magazine or online is a film or a book review. A review offers the writer an opportunity to express his or her reactions to a new creative work while also offering the reader background information to help him or her decide whether or not she should watch or read the new work. Some reviewers become quite famous from their movie reviews and become hugely influential as to whether people decide to go watch a film in the theater. So, background to film reviews. We talked a little bit earlier about the cinema history. Now we're talking about film review history. As early as the first short films that were created by the Lumiere brothers, journalists were already viewing them and then reporting back to the public via the newspapers what they saw. These initial reports were really more about the new technology of film than about the actual stories, and they began around 1895. As films became more popular, certain writers began to write almost exclusively about film in different trade magazines such as Variety, Views, Film Index, The Moving Picture World, and the New York Dramatic Mirror. In 1908, Frank E. Wood became America's first dedicated movie critic. In 1925, Gerald Pratley became Canada's first film critic. At different times and in different countries, film critiques have focused on different theories. One theory that was hugely influential was the auteur theory, which viewed the director in the same light as an author and the entire movie as their creation. As filmmaking requires the work of many different people to create the final production, this may not be the most accurate point of view, but it has remained a very popular one. Some film critics even went on to become filmmakers themselves. Other critics went on to become celebrities for their particular style of film reviews and critiques, such as Pauline Kael, sorry, that word, missing an A there, okay, who wrote for the New Yorker magazine, or Siskel and Ebert, who co-hosted a TV series called Sneak Previews that reviewed movies, and that was hugely popular. When I was young, that was like the show to watch. Okay. Indigenous film critics. Recently, there's been more of a push to have Indigenous film critics as well as Indigenous filmmakers. Just as there's a feeling that non-Indigenous writers may not tell Indigenous stories with the same authenticity and understanding as an Indigenous person, so might non-Indigenous critics have a, sorry, or the wrong word there, have a poor sense of what Indigenous filmmakers may be trying to achieve in their films and their portrayal of Indigenous life. Jason Asenap comments on this issue in an article in which he was at a screening for a movie that he acted on, and an event happened, and then he kind of talks about it in this article. And I wanted to kind of bring it up here because it kind of relates to basically why we are practicing this, right? The 50 or so people at the Durango movie screening that day probably watched a film much darker than they expected, especially since it was part of the Native program. But that night was supposed to be our reward for getting to make the film, in a way. I considered myself friends with everyone involved in Chasing the Light, which was, I guess, the name of it, and I was excited that we could all drive to the screening. My character, named Darrell, like the cheap cigarettes, was pretty sleazy, and I couldn't wait to see the audience's reaction. That is, until a white woman told us all on stage, in front of the crowd, that we were not good representatives of Native work. A white lady told us that. I sat there biting my tongue. What I wanted to say was that while she surely had her own opinions, many no doubt derived from Hollywood, about what Indigenous narratives could and should look like, as far as we were concerned, speaking as actual Indigenous filmmakers, she could kindly bug off. Instead, I deferred to the director, figuring it wasn't my place. Black Horse, who was the director, of course, was used to this sort of thing, or maybe more skilled in the art of diplomacy, and he patiently tried to explain his work to the woman, describing what he was doing with narrative and story. At least that's how I remember it. Honestly, I was so angry that I sort of erased this part of it from my memory. In 2021, with shows like Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs beginning to break through to the mainstream audiences, it's important for Indigenous critics to rise to the occasion and critique these works as only we can. This is still the him talking. Because in our absence, and even in our presence, this kind of mistaken ownership of the Indigenous narrative that I witnessed in Durango will constantly have to be reckoned with. The false tropes and stereotypes long propagated by major studios have only been amplified by critics and audiences conditioned to misunderstand what we're doing, both in revealing our humanity as Indigenous people and fulfilling our mission as artists. These must be dismantled before you can even begin to do the work of actual criticism. Indigenous creators come from a background of indigeneity, and Indigenous critics understand indigeneity and can provide insight that non-Indigenous critics might overlook or even romanticize. You will never hear me accuse another Indigenous filmmaker, as that white woman did, of not being the right kind of representative. You might hear me accuse an Indigenous filmmaker of being corny, but that's something else entirely. As we work at dismantling misconceptions, we must keep in mind that Indigenous work deserves the same respect and intellectual discussion that any other work does. Simply being a cheerleader isn't enough, either for us or for the work itself. So I really liked the way he was explaining why having Indigenous film critics is also so important. And most of us, when we watch movies, we have opinions and we talk about them to our friends. So I feel like this is a type of writing format that is pretty accessible, but I also think it's important. There are more and more Indigenous films and Indigenous movies, and we need up and coming Indigenous film critics. And maybe some of you out there are going to be those people. Okay, so talking about a critique versus being critical. Being critical does not mean being negative in this case. We're talking about doing a film critique. Rather, it means exercising or involving very careful judgment or careful evaluation. And the evaluation is not based just on your own subjective feelings. A strong review should not simply state whether you like or dislike a film. A strong film review weighs the different aspects of the movie and tries to draw a fair conclusion about the merits and the flaws of the film, and like the strengths and the weaknesses. When you're writing a review, be specific and try to be objective. In other words, unbiased. Being specific means that it's not enough to say that you enjoyed the film. You must say what specifically you enjoyed about the film and why that aspect of the film was important to you. Being objective means that your subjective feelings about the subject matter or how they were presented and your personal evaluation does not belong in a critical film review. Now, I'm going to say this was what was written in the unit. I don't 100% agree. I do think that there is room for some personal evaluation, but let's say somebody did a really amazing movie, but it's in a genre that you don't like say Westerns or something. You don't want to say the entire movie is bad just because you don't happen to like that movie, or maybe you don't happen to like the main character. You want to be fair and talk about what was good about the movie, not just what you yourself didn't like. Because other people may like that kind of movie or may like that actor, and you don't want to dissuade them from seeing a movie that they might enjoy. So, for example, a film might bore you, but that's not the only factor in the overall quality of the film. It might be because you're having problems interpreting some aspect of the film, because you don't understand the film's context, or you lack background information, or you're just not interested in that topic, right? Or might be fond of a specific film genre. I myself hate horror movies, and I would have a really hard time being a good judge of a bad versus a good horror movie. Now, if I was supposed to do that, I would still have to talk about what was good about it, but I might not do as good a job as somebody who loved horror movies and had seen many of them. Having said that, a good film critic has to try and put those issues to the side when they are reviewing a film. Okay. So I was trying to find some information about like what are the different elements we want to comment on for movie reviews. And there is something called cinema scale that sort of developed that's trying to counteract how when you're doing a movie review, it can be based a lot on your opinion. And they sort of isolated 10 elements that they think were important to movies. And when they are reviewing movies, they try to comment on all 10 of those elements. Now, I am not insisting that we necessarily comment on all of those elements, but I do think it's important to know that those elements exist. And I wanted to kind of give this to you because it's kind of become an industry standard not just for like general movie reviews, but these guys create sort of an overall point scale out of 10. And they share this information with the public, they share it with the studios, and studios use that information to decide who do they market to, how much money should they spend on marketing, where should they market it, all that kind of thing. So it's considered really reliable information, okay? So hang on. I'm going to kind of pop down a little bit, okay? The problem with praising the sum average of personal opinions is that they will inevitably be biased, good or bad. Art is highly subjective. Some people might have loved the unsettling ending to the movie Inception, while others may have been left wanting more. Which begs the question, how can we measure a movie in a way that helps audiences make a more informed decision when they are deciding which movie to watch next? Enter the cinema scale. The cinema scale creates an objective, reliable standard by which to measure the artistic value of a movie. It contains 10 essential elements to look for in movie reviews, each representing one slice of the film pie. And in their system, they have each element's worth 1 point of 10. I'm not worried about that part. I just kind of wanted to talk about the different elements. So the 10 elements they have are the plot. So the story arc and plausibility. Plausibility is like, how realistic is it? Did you buy this story, or does it seem like, oh, there's no way that could happen? Attraction, the basic premise and the entertainment value, like, was it enjoyable? The theme, which might talk about the identity, the depth, the message. Acting, how was the acting? How were the characters? How was the actor's performance? Dialogue goes to the storytelling and the context. What was it like? Cinematography, that's the filming, the things like the visuals you see, they call it a visual language, the lighting, the setting, the wardrobe. What did you think of all those things? Editing talks about special effects, the pacing, what get left in, what got taken out, the soundtrack, the sound design, the film score, the movies. Directing, I think directing is a hard thing to comment on, but it's there. And then it factor. It factor is one of those funny things. They're talking about, like, sometimes you'll see a movie and it's just kind of unique. It's one of a kind. There's never really been anything quite like that. On the other hand, sometimes you'll see a movie and it's like, oh my gosh, I've seen like 20 films in the last 2 years that are kind of the same story. So even if they've done a good job with it, it's maybe not that interesting because they haven't really created a unique story, okay? I kind of want to go into a little bit more detail on this. I got a little bit of time. So plot. Here they're looking at, does the movie follow a comprehensive story arc? And is it plausible? They kind of created a whole little story arc that they look for here. There's a typical kind of 3-act division that we divide major stories in. The beginning is kind of where you get the setting and the characters and a little bit of exposition, explaining what's happening. And then the problems begin to start. And then the middle section is where all the problems are happening and there's obstacles and they're trying to solve the problem. And then at the end, you usually have the most exciting part of the movie. They call that the climax, where the problem is usually getting solved in one way or the other, right? And then slowly they kind of wrap up all the plots. So things that don't follow a typical story arc or that like leave important parts out can be confusing to a viewer because people get used to watching that. Even if you weren't aware of all these details, we do get kind of used to it. It doesn't mean you can never do it differently, but you have to have good reasons for it. Plausibility. There's a really famous word called the suspension of disbelief, which was coined by Samuel Coleridge. And it talks about the idea that when writers are writing, they need to create a world that seems so real that the reader kind of gets sucked in. And even things that might not seem 100% possible, we suspend our disbelief. But if there's too many things that are unrealistic or not probable to happen, people kind of lose their ability to enjoy the story. So there's all these kind of flashing things that are driving me crazy here. Premise. The premise is the sales pitch. It's the movie trailer and how original it is. I don't really care for that statement. Entertainment value, how exciting it is. Theme. Identity is the idea of a lot of times characters may be trying to figure out who they are or what's their place in the world or do they have value, which is kind of a thing that we as people try to struggle with. And that's kind of characters that have that struggle can be interesting to watch. Depth is the idea of how so I'm going to try and expand my computer here for a second because it's just being so weird here. There we go. How deep is the message? How deep does the story go? How sophisticated is it, right? And it depends what we're talking about. Like a story written for little kids may have a very simplistic message. A story written for older people may have a much more complicated message because adults expect more, right? Does it teach us something new? Does it make us think about a new topic or our lives in a different way? Did we maybe form an emotional connection to the characters or the story? A really good theme and movie will have us do all three. And then acting. Do the characters seem flat and fake, or do they seem realistic, well-rounded? Do you believe the character? Are you enjoying their performance? That kind of thing. Okay. Yeah, we talked about performance. Dialogue is just when the characters are talking to each other. Some stories have lots and lots of dialogue. Some stories have less. Any film usually is going to have a fair bit, and it will tell you stuff about the characters. It tells you a little bit about the message, the theme, and what the overall point of the story is. Okay. You don't want to have all dialogue. Here they've given the example of The Godfather, where there is, he talks about, I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. And it kind of says a lot about what kind of guy he is and gives you a little bit of knowledge that something bad's about to happen. It's not super simplistic and it's not boring. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that one. Cinematography. This, I think, may be the hardest part to talk about if you haven't really written or looked at that kind of stuff before. Continuity is the idea that um, because movies are shot out of order, sometimes you can have weird things where at one moment somebody's hair was wet and the next moment they forgot that the character is supposed to have wet hair and her hair is suddenly dry. There's a really famous example in Pretty Woman where one second she's eating a pancake and the next second she's eating like a biscuit or something else. So because that stuff is shot out of order, there are people that have to kind of go through and watch for those little tiny mistakes that can happen that can be very jarring to the watcher. Creativity is the idea of it being new, unique, interesting. Movies that do something that's kind of for the first time um, usually are way more compelling to the audience because just less boring. Editing, I feel like editing is going to be a hard thing to comment on, but we can try. That's the idea of how quickly is the movie moving, right? Sometimes movies will go very slow. You'll see the person walking slowly. You'll see the person slowly rowing the boat or whatever. And if there's a reason for that, that can be really important. But if it's just bad editing, like they just didn't bother to make it a little more short, it can come off really badly and kind of leave you uninterested in the movie. Special effects, I think we all know what special effects are. That probably should be pretty easy. Some movies really rely on special effects, some have almost nothing. Soundtrack, I feel like that's another one that can be hard to comment on. It's not just the music, right? The sound effects um, can be realistic or non-realistic. One of the things they used to have all the time when I was a kid, they don't do it as much anymore with fight scenes. They would have these really dramatic sounds like shka-ting! That was like a metallic sound that made no sense. In real life, you would never hear that sound if somebody was just waving their hand through the air, right? Those kind of things are, again, stuff that can be really jarring. And sometimes music that makes no sense, like it's a popular song, but it doesn't really relate to the story, can be kind of weird as well. And that's what they're talking about, the film score. Sometimes music can make the movies. Directing is another area I think is really hard to comment on. All the things that we're talking about are at least partially directing choices. So I think when you're talking about all of those kind of things, that you are commenting on the directing. I don't really expect more at this point. I think it's just a hard concept. All right, where are we at? Execution, same thing. I think that's really hit. The it factor, the one of a kind factor. Kind of, I don't know if you can see it in the background. They're sort of showing a little bit of the Lion King. I'm trying not to include it because I'm worried that YouTube will flash me and get mad at me showing things. I don't know if those are from YouTube or not. There are certain movies that were just pivotal, that just changed how people did things in the movie theater. Things like The Wizard of Oz and its use of color, The Matrix and how they did their fight scenes, Star Wars and how they did their story arcs. Some of those movies just were milestones. And because of that, even if you aren't maybe a fan of that particular type of movie, they've accomplished something that is worth mentioning and that can make the movie worth watching, even if it isn't your favorite style or those actors aren't your favorite types of actors. Okay, we are going to talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. I just kind of wanted to talk about that generally. We're running a little bit out of time, but we talked a little bit about Siskel and Ebert. I wanted to grab them just because they were so popular for so long. They've got a lot of content out there. And although some of their content is like that TV show, there also is some content written down. So yeah, I don't think we'll have time to do it, but tomorrow we will take a look at some of their movie reviews to kind of get an idea of how a movie review sounds. Because some of us may have read a lot of movie reviews, other people may not have read any, and they are a really kind of specific type of writing. So if you've never read one, it'll be kind of hard to write them. There are obviously newer writers besides Robert Ebert, but I feel like they were kind of the mega stars of the Film Critique Awards. So that's why I want to use them as kind of one example, but I'll look for some more modern people as well, okay? If you're having any problem with this, let me know. Oh, one of the reasons, like I said, why I had to change this particular assignment was because I have found that the original assignment, the web links no longer worked, okay? Some places may still have a copy, a physical copy of the movie Muffins for Granny. And if you have that, that's great. You're welcome to do the original. I don't have a copy of it, and the web links no longer work. And I've looked around everywhere. I cannot find another web link that works. So if you have the original and you need these lessons, let me know and I can shoot you all the little links so that you can see these movies, okay? Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.